On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're taking a live look into tonight's game against Philly. We're also playing the Blashill blame game, as well as wrapping things up with an Eric Johnson to Tampa Bay rumor. All that and more coming up on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Danker. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Locked On Lightning. Tonight, we're talking about live look into the game currently against the Flyers going on right now as we record. We're also finally addressing the whole Jeff Blashill controversy that is circling around Lightning fandom. We'll get more into that and what that means exactly, as well as wrapping things up with this Eric Johnson rumor that I'm starting to see float around. It's starting to get creep into trade deadline articles all around the internet. We'll talk about that at the end of the show. But before we get into anything, please, I just want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. So we're diving into this game that is going on right now as the Lightning try to complete their 3-game road trip with a sweep, coming off 2 straight wins over the weekend. And I want to clear something up real quick before we go more into this game. I was catching some heat in the comments, which is, it's fine. I welcome it. On the last episode, if you didn't tune in, I stated how 2 wins is 2 wins. That's great. It's great on paper. It's good for the standings. It's good for what it's exactly what the Lightning needed after those 3 abysmal games that they lost in their previous matchups. But I also said, let's not get too excited just yet, because those were against teams that really don't have their, that really don't have their act together. And I will say the Lightning are also kind of in part of that group of NHL teams not having their act together. But as opposed to the Devils, as opposed to maybe the Islanders, the Lightning aren't as, I would say, discombobulated. They have better rosters for the most part. One might make the argument that and rightfully so that the Devils are on paper a better team. But obviously the standings don't lie. The Tampa Bay Lightning are ahead of those teams by quite a bit in the wild card race. And really kind of have been ahead of those teams for the most part all season long. And so what I was trying to convey on that last episode, it was that, yes, let's celebrate the wins, but let's also, that doesn't change the fact that this team has played very inconsistent and poorly at times throughout this entire season and still has a lot of work to do before we really start to turn the page for the best with this team. That's all I was saying, and I know some other people. So there was one commenter who I've seen quite a bit comment on our YouTube. And if you guys want to criticize me or whatever, that's fine. I welcome it. And as you see, I am addressing it. But someone was saying that I was being negative because of that. And I respectfully disagree with that. I mean, I can be over the top sometimes. I will agree with that. But so we're taking a look right now. It's the closing seconds. We have about 45 seconds left in the first period of the Lightning's game tonight in Philadelphia against, of course, the Flyers. They're currently down 1-0. And opening thoughts are that this team has played very poorly. They have turned over the puck quite a bit to begin this game as I speak. And as I say that, Pervix actually makes a good play on a break down the other side of the ice off a turnover. Wouldn't you believe it? And I'm going to be very interested to see once this game concludes, or because this isn't exactly a big stat that is really much kept in the NHL, and that's really time on attack. Time of possession and time on attack are two very different things. For those who may not know, time on attack is really mostly when one team has the puck in the opposing team's zone, whereas time of possession could account for at any point, at anywhere on the ice where the team has possession of the puck. And I mean, though both those numbers probably don't look good right now, and I'm sure on the Lightning broadcast, if I'm ever able to look at it, because maybe some of you who are not based in Tampa, I don't know how it was in Tampa, but as for us out-of-staters, there was a blackout in the Philly arena tonight, and I guess that affected at least the ESPN Plus feed for the Tampa Bay Lightning. So I'm currently watching this game on the Philly feed, but I'm very curious to see what those numbers are going to be at the end of this period as the period concludes. I'm also very curious to see how those, vary by period, because, really tell you if the Lightning continue to really, not play well as this game goes on. And really, when you look at it through the first period at this point, very low shot game. Both these teams combined for only 5 shots on goal, which is unbelievable. But then again, I don't know if I don't know if we're gonna really trust the NHL.com stats just yet, because sometimes they don't do a very good job of keeping those up in game. But you look at the faceoff percentage, obviously that's the alarming thing. Philadelphia is at this point in time dominating the faceoff circle. That is something that the Lightning, especially in their last game, did not do a very good job of. And it's really surprising because, this is a team that you expect at least if they lose, if they're not doing something else to help their cause, you could always kind of count on them, whether it be power play goals or face-off percentage, for them to be in the top team in that category. But the thing that has really alarmed me tonight was that goal thus far, the Brink goal. On not only was it off a turnover, it was also on a play, and it's gotten to the point where it's almost exhausting to talk about this. So, and I've spoken about it over the last couple of episodes. If you want to go back and look for it and look for the quote, that's fine. But basically what I've been saying all year is, the Lightning have a plethora of issues going on with them from top to bottom. The defensive side, the offensive side, goaltending has been an issue even when Vasilevsky has been back. And really my grievance with him all year has been he is a $9 million goaltender, or whatever exactly he is making on average per year. But regardless of the dollar amount or the exact dollar amount, I think the genuine consensus is that he is viewed as an elite goaltender. And you can look at his regular season stats and say, well, come on, numbers don't lie. Well, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It all depends on context. And when you look at the goal from tonight, and I'm not saying that this game is over. It's not. It's a 1-goal game. The Lightning could easily come back in the second period, as they are prone to do at certain instances, and completely take over this game. But it was, and I'm not going to sit here and say Vasilevsky can't give up goals. He has to go out there and pitch shutouts. There's some instances in which I wish that was something that we could heavily rely on, but you can't. Especially this version of Andrei Vasilevsky, in which he looks pretty much mortal this year and last year. And at first I said, especially coming into this year, it had to have been because of the back issues. Well, clearly that may not be the issue. Maybe it's just, I don't know. I don't know if it's just bad mechanics. To me, he doesn't pass the eye test on most nights. He doesn't look like a confident goaltender. Even when he is making saves, he's moving around, and you could see there's a little bit of indecisiveness in the way he is positioned and in the way that he moves around his crease. And that's an issue. And I know at the end of the day, it's also doesn't all fall on him. The defense in front of him has been atrocious. But really, when you look at Andrei Vasilevsky's season, and you could really sum it up by that first goal of this game, really. And the Lightning have their work cut out for them. You know, it's I think we could all agree now. I think most of our listeners that have been around for quite some time, and even if you're new to the show, if you've been watching hockey for quite some time, you know that, you know, very early on, you could kind of tell if your goaltender has it. I mean, some guys switch it on later than others, but the first 10 minutes, if you even want to go 20, are really telling of what kind of night you're going to get out of your guy and between in the crease, and so far it's not really promising given how easy of a goal that was. And yes, it was easy. You know, it did hit him on his pad, but if he was some backup rookie or whatever the case may be, you know, that's another story. But we're talking about a guy who's supposed to be top 3 in the league, the guy who's really supposed to be in the conversation for the Vezina on a yearly basis. And we just haven't seen that. And like I will say in the upcoming conversation, when we're talking about Jeff Blashill, and I'm going to say the same thing for Andrei Vasilevsky right now. When is it going to be time when we stop making excuses for people and just hold people accountable for not doing their jobs on this team? And that goes from the backup goaltender to the head coach, and even if you want to stretch it up high, to the GM. So let me know in the comments below. I'm sure I'm going to get some heat from this, and that is perfectly fine. I will address it if it is good enough heat. You know, if it's something really petty, then I'm just going to ignore it. But I'm glad to have this open conversation with you. And then also, you know, if you want to comment, if you want to get a comment from me back in real time, you could also go to our Discord server, because I'm on there. There's a couple more fans. It's growing a little bit by little every day. We're also on Reddit, so if you want to drop a comment on our Reddit page, you're more than welcome to as well. So coming up in just a little bit, we're going to play the Jeff Blashill blame game. What does that mean? You're going to have to stick around and find out. But right now, let's talk about our first sponsor of the show today, and that is our friends over at the Sleeper app. Now, it is the halfway point of the NHL season, Lightning fans, but regardless of where the Lightning are in the current standings, I want to remind you that you can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you could win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy contests. All you have to do is pick guys like Braden Point or Nikita Kucherov to record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minuses, and more in a given game. So use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. So as always, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. We're available wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel there. Hit that thumbs up button below this video and drop a comment below. This is definitely going to be a big point of conversation, I think, below the video. So this isn't something that I've really spoken about, or I don't think I've addressed it at all, really. Just because I feel like at first that it was kind of a scapegoat situation. You know, the Lightning aren't playing well. And you know, fans, as they have the right to look towards things outside of the players. And that's right. That's a okay thing to do. I mean, it's not really my route to go. But some people prefer to do it. And the common theme all year has been, well, Jeff Blashill, he's coming in. And ever since he's been here, this team has not been playing well defensively. And my issue with that, and that goes for any sport, because we see it mostly in football, defensive coordinators, offensive coordinators. Offense is not playing well. Who do you blame? Do you blame the players? Do you blame the offensive coordinator? In this case, Jeff Blashill is, if you will, want to go that far, call him the defensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Lightning. And their defense, as we all know and have stated to exhaustion on this podcast, has not played well this year. And my whole issue with that, okay, and I've seen some comments, people saying, well, this is not something that came out of the air. Blashill, he was kind of known for not having good defenses when he was the head coach in Detroit. And my thing is with that argument is, well, Detroit wasn't a good team when he was there. Yeah, they made the playoffs once. That was his first year there. But that was really, they hadn't really started their rebuild just yet. They lost in 5 games that year, but you look at the roster, you have a very, very big mixture of guys that were on pretty much the way out the door defensively and guys that were just starting out their career. So, not a good mix of personnel there in Detroit during his tenure. Now he gets here, and in years past, the Lightning have been, up until him walking in the door and Derek Lalonde taking the job in Detroit, basically Lightning and the Red Wings switching out coaches. The Lightning have always been known to be, for the most part, a good defensively minded team. And now, of course, they are not. And of course, when someone walks in the door and things start to get bad and, you try to connect the dots. And I totally get that. But at the same time, I want to ask all Lightning fans this question. And I'm not defending Jeff Blashill, and I'll tell you why after I make my point with this, is you look at the defensive personnel that we have. And not only that, you look at the play from the forwards, they haven't exactly been playing well on the defensive side of things either. You just look at the first period of tonight's game against Philadelphia. That should tell you all you need to know about the state of defense on this team. But, if you're trying to compare the Lightning's performance the last 2 years as opposed to the years prior with Lalonde, my defense of Blashill will be, well, guess what? Lalonde had it a little bit easier. You look at the core of players, and it's been no secret the last couple of years. The Lightning have lost a lot of good players, not out of their own ignorance or fault. It's because of salary cap constrictions. And when you bring in a new coach and you're moving players out that have been so solid for you, most notably Ryan McDonough, who, we could all agree, most likely if he was still in Tampa Bay, this team wouldn't be playing as bad. You'd see better play out of the defensemen. As for the offensive side, the forward side of things, maybe that would actually help them out a little bit. Maybe Vasilevsky would play a little better. But I don't believe it falls on Blashill exclusively. If there is an issue. But my thing is we could blame Jeff Blashill all we want. We could blame him for the defense. We could blame him for this team not playing well as a whole. You could blame him for anything you want. But at the end of the day, if we see an issue, wouldn't be the possibility, wouldn't it be the more likely scenario or possibility that everybody sees it within the organization? It can't be this far out occurrence where the fan base is the only one that has an issue with this. I am sure the players are very much aware of how poorly they have played this year defensively. I am probably would bet money that the coaching staff is very much aware of how badly or poorly they have played this season. I am very confident that Julian Brees-Boss is very aware of how poorly this team has played. But if you want to blame one person for the Lightning struggles this year, there's only one person that you could blame for this defensive issue with Tampa Bay Lightning, and not only that it occurred, but it's an ongoing situation, is Jon Cooper. I refuse to live in this world where Jeff Blashill is to blame. He's the evil of all evils, but Jon Cooper is somehow immune to that criticism. I mean, he's the guy that brought him in the first place, and it's no secret those two are best friends or very good friends. So why is he not taking the heat as well? Because I look at it this way, you could, if you want to blame Blashill, that's fine. And I'll end it with this by saying the buck, it starts and it stops with Jon Cooper. Okay? And if Jon Cooper wants to continue to not address this or not think it is Blashill's problem, guess who's losing their job at the end of the day? It's not going to be this year. It may not be next year, but if this continues and it becomes an ongoing problem to where it affects this team like it has affected them this year, I'll tell you very, very much so, unless, better personnel is brought in, and you could even extend that blame to Julian Brees-Boss, because bringing in Hayden Fleury and Calvin DeHaan isn't exactly something that is going to help this team long term, and for whatever reason, continuing to stick with Nick Pervix. If you're going to extend, if you want to throw blame around, blame Cooper, blame Brees-Boss. So let me know in the comments below how you feel about that. I'm sure I'm going to hear about it. Let me know in the Discord server. Let me know in Reddit. If you want to let me know on Twitter, I'm at DenkyDank, DenkyD8NK. Can't wait to hear all the reactions about that coming up probably later after this podcast, later tonight after this episode is published. So coming up in just a little bit, we're going to talk about a little rumor that I started to see a little going around a little bit on Twitter a couple of days ago, and now I'm starting to see articles. I don't know if this is true. I don't know if one is feeding off the other. It's a very interesting conversation. We'll have it. Erik Johnson to Tampa Bay coming up in just a little bit. But first, let's talk about our last sponsors of today's show, and that is our friends over at Camino Consulting. Now, you've heard of the course that Camino is offering with Locked On, where Locked On is offering 25% discount running to the end of the month on seminars with conflict resolution with families and couples. Well, guess what? Now their management team is doing seminars for your next recruiting class or hiring group, because you identified the right candidates and because you've learned how to communicate and motivate them. And that is all because of your friends at Camino Consulting. Listen, in both sport and business, the challenge in differentiating candidates and recruits is in an endless battle. Everyone can demonstrate their measurables and qualifications, but we all know it is the intangibles that matter when those things are similar. But you aren't in business management or working with a team. They pay referrals. Make some money making your workplace and favorite teams better. Every group works better together at the end of the year. So contact Camino Consulting at CaminoConsulting.com.ca and get on the fast track to understanding. And one last time, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. And we're also available on YouTube, so subscribe to the channel. The Lightning and the Flyers are about to kick off the second period. Looks very weird how much lights are on in that arena. It's very odd. It's very 1970s hockey. Um, so I saw a tweet a couple of days ago. I don't know if it was a listener that pointed it out to me or it just came across my feed. There was an article or someone, or there was someone that tweeted it about that they were hearing that Erik Johnson, his name was being thrown around with the Tampa Bay Lightning. I checked in on this person's account who initially tweeted that. I took it with a grain of salt, and I'm not saying that's the reason why, but I was a little skeptical of this person. Never heard of them. Had very few listeners. It could have just been some kind of thing thrown out in terms of just maybe wishful thinking. But now today I was scrolling just online. I just kind of figured, let me type in Erik Johnson and Tampa Bay Lightning. And lo and behold, Last Word on Hockey, a sub article or page, whatever you want to call it, that covers hockey on Last Word on Sports, wrote a whole article about it today. And so in case you don't know who Erik Johnson is, I'm just going to read off the scouting report that comes from this article. So Erik Johnson plays for the Buffalo Sabres. And his scouting report is he's a physical defenseman who takes care of his own zone. Johnson fits a classical shutdown archetype. Johnson throws his weight around and provides solid leadership presence, something the Sabres needed desperately. Johnson does not bring much offense to the table, which is concerning for a team like the Lightning that lacks secondary scoring. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but that was kind of like a little snippet of the thing, of the scouting report. And that was written by Jack Pelota of Locked On Hockey, if you want to check out more of his stuff. My assessment of that, and it's kind of goes hand in hand with whomever the conversation I had about when one of our listeners threw out the idea of Jacob Chikrin being on the Lightning's trade target list. Just like Ottawa, I'm going to make the same argument for Buffalo. Why would they do that? Why would they trade a defenseman, or anybody for that matter, to a team in their own division where, especially the Sabres, unless something drastically changes, a team that's starting or has started to kind of progress in the standings, took a little bit of a seat back this year, but a team that nonetheless is going to compete in future seasons. And my thing is why, regardless whether it be you just don't think that this person is part of your future plans, maybe you don't think they're as talented as you think they're going to be. Why, for whatever reason, why would the Sabres make that trade to Tampa? Why would they even entertain the idea of that? Now, that's really what it comes down to. The Tampa Bay Lightning could, for whatever reason, they could be absolutely in the Erik Johnson conversation or in the Erik Johnson contest. But at the end of the day, all it takes is the Sabres to laugh on the other side of the phone to Julian Brees-Boss and say, absolutely not. You're in our division. Why would we ever do that? And that's it. That's the end of the conversation. And that really goes for any sport. I mean, there are very few times in which you see teams trade within their own division, let alone hockey. So I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's a nice and kind of Jack Pelota, like I said, who wrote this article, kind of made the argument. Also, why would the Lightning do that? Just because, the Lightning obviously need a physical defenseman. They need somebody to come in and be a lockdown guy, like what we saw from Ryan McDonough. But at the same time, just like the article said, you need secondary scoring. That's something that we have discussed quite at length in recent weeks. And really, at the end of the day, that's why the Noah Hannafin trade makes so much more sense. The one especially that we published. If you weren't around for that or missed that episode, go back, check my tweets. I'm at DankyDank, DENKYD8NK. Essentially, I did a trade in which the Lightning and the money works out, and it's beneficial on paper to both teams. Lightning get Blake Coleman and Noah Hannafin for Alex Barré-Boulet, Brent Seabrook's contract, and a bunch of draft picks. And it also just makes sense because they're in opposite conferences, opposite divisions. Why, doesn't hurt anybody in the long run. But it could be something, I will say, that there could, for those of you who were initially probably a fan of that trade for Erik Johnson, it could be something that could pop up last minute because, as what we saw last year, Julian Brees-Boss did not do a good job in terms of managing his time, or clearly he wasn't as proactive as he should have been. And, that could be the case this year. So maybe that could be something that could fall into their lap last minute. Who knows? I mean, the trade deadline is a very strange thing. I mean, you see deals popping up that, really, I think even the Elliot Friedmans and the Frank Cervellis didn't even see coming. So, we could very well be seeing a trade that the Lightning make at the deadline that could be something that could be a very pleasant surprise. An example, a couple of years ago, I don't think a lot of people, and maybe I'm mistaken, this was 4 years ago, I don't think a lot of people saw the Barclay Goodrow trade happen, coming. I don't think a lot of people saw the Blake Coleman. I think that actually was more of a known or a more highly rumored thing to happen. But yeah, the Goodrow trade. I don't think a lot of people really saw the Nick Paul trade happening or coming. And maybe the Lightning will get lucky at the deadline, and maybe they'll get a pleasant surprise in a defenseman, preferably. But the Lightning have more important things to tend to right now, as they are still losing 1-0 in the second period, and we're still seeing basically it's the Lightning go into the zone, they give up the puck, and it's a track race down the other side of the ice. And can't wait to see those time on attack numbers for the Lightning once this game concludes. So let me know in the comments below how you feeling about Erik Johnson. Is that something that you want? My opinion, not really. Still all in on Noah Hannafin. If not, and they don't give up too much, maybe Chris Tanev. But then again, that's just really a rental where Hannafin could potentially be a long-term thing. So we'll be back tomorrow to recap this game, as well as talk about the probably more rumors that will spurt up on the internet in the next 24 hours surrounding this Lightning team. So as always, you could subscribe to the podcast, give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form, as well as subscribe to our channel on YouTube. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Tanker. I'll talk to you in the next one.